Okay, so this is my dad, Nathan Buckaloo, and he will be talking about his experiences in the Iraq War, specifically Operation Iraqi Freedom. So first, may I have a brief overview of your experiences before getting into specifics, please?
My experience being deployed. Uh, Briefly, I was a Marine reservist that was stationed in Chicopee, Massachusetts with a wing support squadron, and we got deployed to Operation Iraqi Freedom May of 2004. Yeah, May of 2004. And we spent a little over 9 months in country in Iraq. We were based at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. Our day-to-day operations were mainly to maintain the runway at the air base in support of the air wing that was stationed there. We also did some secondary missions into the towns, and we had a forward or a satellite base in Al-Qaim near the Syrian border, which I spent a month and a half up there, and then we came home.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Briefly.
Okay, so what were your reactions to events that were unfolding and leading up to your deployment?
I think my reaction was not one of surprise. After the September 11th bombings of the World Trade Center, we kind of had a feeling that we'd be deployed at some point, and then I would say a year or two passed, and it wasn't as prevalent that we felt like we were going to get deployed until the initial Operation Iraqi Freedom began, and then our unit was on high alert, I guess, or we were told to be prepared at any time to be deployed. So when I got the phone call initially that we were going to be activated, I wasn't surprised because we'd all been talking about it. But definitely there's some shock there. Even if you're preparing for it, it's still surreal, I guess, in a way, to get that call and go, okay, now I really am leaving. So, I don't know if that...
Yeah. I could imagine. Do you remember like the specific day?
I don't remember the date specifically that it happened. I do remember sitting at my desk at work because I was a reservist. I had a civilian job and just normal day-to-day routine, and then I got a phone call, which any outside call would have been from any kind of customer or person I worked with, but this one was from my platoon sergeant, and he basically gave us a rundown of what was going on and that we would have to show up at the unit that coming Saturday and to start our out briefing and get our orders and whatnot for being activated.
So you'd been a Marine for a while, a couple years?
Up to that point, let me see, here I count. Almost 7 years, 8 years at that point. So I'd done my I was on my second enlistment as a reservist. I was coming to the end of my enlistment period, so it was right at the end of my obligated enlistment.
And then you got called to your first overseas
Yes,
deployment.
my first and only overseas deployment. So that just, when they activated us, it kind of obviously extended the contract that I had for enlistment with them.
Okay. So once you got over to where you were stationed, what was that like? What was the environment there
It
like?
was shocking, I guess. I grew up in Arizona, in Tucson, which is a desert, and going to Iraq, Kuwait is where we showed up first, and they chartered us a flight for our unit. We flew into Kuwait, and I just remember getting off the plane and feeling like I was standing in the middle of an oven with somebody pointing a hot air blow dryer at my face. It was just nothing you could prepare for, I guess. Even growing up in Arizona, I knew what heat was, but it was just different. It was so hot and windy, and there's dust everywhere in the air, just gritty. So that was a culture shock, even coming from growing up in the desert. So I imagine for my fellow soldiers and Marines that it was even more of a culture shock coming from Massachusetts, where most of them had all grown up and lived, to a desert that was that different from their environment. And then they put us on a C-130 and flew us up to Al Asad Air Base, and that was even more of a culture shock, because in Kuwait you're on behind the enemy lines, you're safe, and then going from that to where we were stationed at the Al Asad Air Force Base was shocking. I remember the first day there, we had the Iraqis, or not the Iraqis, the insurgents that were over there would fire upon the base with rockets every once in a while, and literally within several hours of us being on base and getting settled in our tents, our temporary home, the base was fired upon, and nobody knew what to do. We hadn't been briefed yet on anything, so a lot of people ran. A lot of people stood still in shock. It was just not something you can prepare for. It was very shocking, I guess, at first. Just the initial first day was scary and different and surreal, I guess. I don't know. It was just not, it wasn't happening.
You were in your early 20s, mid 20s, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so even more so.
Even more so being that age. And then I was probably mid-range in age for our group. We had a lot of guys that were 18 and 19 right out of high school, had never left home before. So they were even more, shell-shocked by what was going on, where we were. And the fact that they had just basically finished high school, went to boot camp, and then got deployed was, I think for a couple of us that were in my group, I was a sergeant at the time, so I was in charge of a platoon, and those of us that were in that, I guess, management level, you could call it, felt like we were kind of mother hens. We had all these young guys that we had to take care of and make sure that their needs were met, and that they knew what was going on, and they were going to be safe.
It's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
So once you kind of, I guess the only word to say is settled, but you're not really settled there.
No, well, I mean, that's a good word for it. Initially, like I said, our temporary housing was the tents, because it was a transition phase, us coming in and taking over control of the base from the outgoing unit, which was an Army unit. So as they were moving out and we were moving in, they kept us at the tents temporarily, and then we moved in, or settled, as you said, in our permanent home for the time we were going to be there. I just want to make sure okay. It went dark. They put us in, they're like Conex boxes. You ever seen a shipping container? Those metal shipping containers?
Yeah.
There was a whole bunch of those that were set up basically as housing, and they had them all set together in a row, maybe a couple hundred of them or more, and they paired us up with a bunkmate, and that was our permanent home. So myself and my very good friend Evan Boudreau, your uncle, were bunked up together. We had a set of bunk beds in our little Conex box and a chair, and that was what we made home.
Okay. So now that we've kind of gone through what it was like first being there, reactions, what were some of the duties? I mean, you kind of briefly went through it, but what were some of the duties within your time there?
My duty specifically, or the unit?
Both?
Both?
Either? No.
Well, I'll touch briefly on the unit and then let you know what I did, and you can use whatever you need.
Sure.
The unit's main, or my unit's main goal was support of the wing squadron. So we had heavy equipment and motor transportation that would move things from place to place, and we had to keep the runways clean and clear. So that was another big part of the job, and we had military personnel that was attached to our unit that made sure that the security, or the fence around the airport, was maintained and patrolled. And then my specific duties while I was there was we worked in the motor transport section. I was a heavy equipment mechanic, and so I would take all of our pieces of equipment and make sure that they were maintained, and I would make sure that if anything was broken, the parts would get ordered, and I took care of the storeroom for all their incoming parts, and then had my platoon, if something was broken or damaged, I would task them with fixing whatever piece of equipment needed to be maintained. That was my primary job, and then secondary to that, we did patrols through the village outside the base. We did patrols through other villages in the nearby surrounding area to look for contraband was the main goal, I guess, going door to door, but also being a presence in the community that surrounded it, so that the Iraqis felt safe, I guess. And but I mean, we were also there looking for weapons of mass destruction, insurgents, which were not necessarily Iraqis. That was the difficult part, is knowing who your enemy was. A lot of the insurgents were not Iraqi citizens. They were, militants that came in from Afghanistan or Syria or Saudi Arabia, or just disgruntled, I don't know, I wouldn't say they weren't all Al-Qaeda, but I guess a lot of insurgents are, I would categorize them as people that had a beef or with America, or extremist Islamic groups that were terrorists, I guess. They were against America. they would flood in from those other countries, and that's who we were fighting more than anybody.
Um, so you said it was hard to kind of, what's the word? It's hard to differentiate between the civilians and the insurgents.
Yeah, I would think the word you're looking for is identify.
Yeah.
It's hard to identify with the enemy or who the enemy was because they didn't wear a military uniform per se, and they didn't form in groups. Like if you think about World War I or II, where it was one side in trenches fighting another side in trenches, and each side had their specific military uniforms. That's not how that war was at all. It was very out in the open. Anybody that was in in normal civilian clothes or in a mishmash of military uniform could have been your enemy. And the hard part was we were, as an American fighting force, we all wear uniforms. So your enemy knows who you are, but you don't know who they are. That made it very disconcerting, I guess, being over there, because you weren't really sure who exactly you were fighting against. I mean, we got to know people in the nearby village and knew them as non-combatants, but that doesn't mean that they didn't give information to the enemy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So anybody could have been somebody that was against you. That was difficult to deal with, I guess.
Yeah. So like some of the, so that like the people that you weren't fighting with, what were their reactions? Like how did you interact with them?
I feel like that the normal Iraqi citizen that was not combatant, which was most of the Iraqi citizens, I would say, they really appreciated us being there. I wouldn't say they loved us being there because it was a hostile force, I guess, but they really appreciated what the Americans were doing for them. They, I remember about halfway through our time there, they held an election, and the Iraqis were just so thankful that they could go and vote, that it wasn't a communistic, I guess it was more of a dictatorship. The dictator was gone, and they were given the right to choose, who they wanted to, and that was the first time in history they'd been able to make that choice. So they were very appreciative. We were there in support of those elections and support of making it safe for them to go and to the polls or whatever. I don't recall who was running. I don't recall if it was a successful election. I just recall the reaction of the people in the town being very grateful that we were there for that. And I would say generally they were glad we were there. They were glad that we assisted in ridding them of a dictator that was cruel to them. So I would say that, that generally they were a happy people that we were present. Is that?
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
I was just going to say that the children were, I remember the kids were really ecstatic. They loved seeing anybody in uniform, and we would, when we did our patrols through town, one of the sergeants that worked with me, he had brought a big bag of candy over with him, and we'd give the kids candy, and they'd run after the vehicles, and they're just excited to see soldiers, and it was a joy to be able to give them candy, or give them some sort of happiness, especially seeing I wouldn't say poverty, but I guess then for us it would be considered poverty, kids without tennis shoes, and kids walking around barefoot and torn clothes, and they weren't all put together like we are,
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they're impoverished at the same time, That's just their level of
Right.
this is how they grow up,
Yeah.
But
What was it like keeping in contact with your loved one throughout?
it was difficult. We had when we were on the base that we were staying at had a computer center, so we could make phone calls at the computer center, or we could try and send an email at the computer center. But it was very, you're talking, what is it now, 15 years, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
10 years ago, the technology isn't like we had now, nearly, and the internet access was limited, so you got maybe 15 minutes on the internet, 5 minutes on a phone call, and imagine a base with several thousand people there, and everybody wanting to get in touch with their loved ones. So contact was, for me, and it was early on with my family, that we decided once a week, if I could. Sometimes it'd be 2-3 weeks before I get a chance to make a phone call. So there was letters. You could write letters and receive packages from home. So that was encouraging, but staying in contact was tough because it was such a limited resource,
Mm-hmm.
I think I called home maybe a handful of times throughout the 9-10 month deployment. So it was put a lot of distance there. It was tough.
Mm. Yeah. When you weren't out doing patrols or cleaning up the airway, what did you guys, I guess you were all pretty much guys for the most part. What did you all do?
To pass the time?
Yeah.
We had football. We'd play football, or we'd play some other game and stay active. We also had, I called it the Haji Mart. It was like a marketplace down, and they allowed some of the local people to come, and they could sell different things there. We could purchase, a case of soda if we want, or we could purchase, I don't know, cookies or candy or from the locals. Some of them had videos and DVDs. We'd buy the DVDs, and me and my roommate would watch movies, and I don't know, we get care packages from my wife, so we'd sit there with the cookies or with whatever she sent us and watch our movies to pass the time when we were off duty. Slept. That's a good way to pass time. Sleep whenever you can.
Mm.
And then we'd exercise and stay fit,
Right. What was coming home like after being so long?
It was great, obviously, to be home. Um, it's almost the same culture shock that I was talking about earlier when we first got to Iraq. After being over there for so long, and you have your routine that you do every day, and you know the sounds and sights, and you know the people that surround you. Like coming home, as much as you want to be home, is almost a shock as well.
Mm-hmm.
I remember maybe the first week, second week maybe, that I was home, going to the grocery store, and I couldn't stay inside the grocery store. It was too much commotion. I was used to very little commotion, and the sounds, being, you know, used to the sounds of the desert and the sounds of, you know, even if we got bombed, you were used to it by then. By the time you left, you knew what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
So coming home and being in the grocery store with so much commotion and so many people and so many different sounds was overwhelming. I had to go out and sit in the car and wait for your mother to finish shopping.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, all that aside, it was still great to come home and see Mommy and you and your brother and sister. It was just a great reunion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, missed you guys so much. So it was, that initial was just mixed emotions, you know, getting used to being home again.
Right.
Just like anything else.
Right. Sorry.
That's right.
All these questions are so vague. They're all kind of the same. I'll edit that part out.
Yeah, we should edit that.
Yeah.
I don't think they're all vague. You just need to. What detail are you looking for? That's what you need to determine as you go.
Yeah. Okay. So you came home and you stayed in contact with a lot of the Marines that you were deployed with.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what has it been like for them, like compared to you?
I think that depends on the person. I have several friends that, as weird as it sounds, being deployed to war was probably a good experience for them because it made them grow up, made them become responsible, become driven.
Mm-hmm.
It, in my opinion, it's one of those things in life that opens your eyes to, how do I say it? You have to really come to terms with your mortality prior to going over there. And that's, I guess, just my opinion. But in doing that, a lot of people realized that they weren't doing anything with their life prior to that. Does that make sense? So a lot of these guys, I'd say a fair amount of the guys that I was with, it was that kind of eye-opening experience. It was, like I said, it sounds weird, but it was a good thing for them to have to come to terms with that, because then when we came back, I've seen a lot of them just totally turn their lives around and for the better, and grow up and be more mature and more responsible and disciplined. I would say that'd be the majority, that the people that I was with. Now on the flip side, like I said, it depends on the person. We had one or two people that were affected in the opposite direction. had some severe post-traumatic stress syndrome. Never really integrated back into normal life when they got back. So war or for them was not a good experience. It was something they couldn't recover from. And I guess a fatality or an injury isn't the only thing that is caused by war. You have also mental and emotional damage that can be just as bad as being shot or just as bad as losing your life for certain people.
Right.
Edit that out too.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been through pretty much all of this.
Is there anything else you want to know? You
Yeah.
move the house? Can you move things around?
Oh yeah, I'll go back and edit certain parts of this. Kind of take sections and put it into the.
Or take a section from the end and put it
Mhm.
in the middle wherever you want.
Right.
So, yes.
Have you seen the Gambler?
No.
What?
With Mark Wahlberg.
I think so.
Definitely putting this in there.
Yeah, same pictures.
Okay. Yeah, if there's no other specific, I don't know. I was just kind of looking for what it was like, kind of both on the personal side and the warlike side, I guess. I don't know how to put it.
Yeah.
But you really, I think I was expecting very little, and I got a lot, so that's good.
More than you expected?
Yeah.
I was going to tell you one more story.
Sure.
I remember telling you about the Haji Mart,
Mm-hmm.
and you had asked earlier how the people's reaction was, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The little village outside of Al-Assad where we were is small, I guess, on the poorer side village. And as shocking as the heat was for us when we first got there, we get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other thing that came as a shock is in the wintertime, it gets really cold.
Hmm.
It's a desert, but I think we got snow flurries one night. Because there's nothing there to hold the heat.
Right.
And I guess this little story is more about the symbiotic nature of the people that you're living with.
Mm-hmm.
Because we felt concern for the children in the town. Not being warm enough and not having, they lived in adobe huts and tin shacks. They didn't have heated and air conditioned homes, and they didn't have covers and blankets and clothes.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided as a group to go. We did a soda mess. So we'd go buy cases of soda from that mart, like I told you, and then we would charge. People could come and get cold sodas from our little motor pool,
Mm-hmm.
and we charged 50 cents a can. I think it cost us maybe 10 cents a can to buy the case.
Mm-hmm.
And then we took all the proceeds to put back in the fund to buy more Coke, and whatever was profit from that, we went back to the Haji Mart
Mm-hmm.
and bought huge, furry blankets that they sold there.
Mm-hmm.
And when we went out in town, we'd give them to the families for the kids, and shoes for the kids. So that was one of the things that we took it upon ourselves to do, because we felt that need there, to give something to them,
Mhm.
because they were very hospitable to us. So,
That's awesome.
now you were looking for some personal aspect as well. That was one of the things that we decided to do as a group.
That's perfect. I don't know. We have a good 35 minutes worth here.
And you should be able to find something in there that works for you.
Oh yeah, definitely.
If you need to do any follow-up questions, let me know.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, sir.
You're welcome, man.
Okay.